Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 263rd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss the rules for national elections. Are they too open to fraud? And should they be returned to the old method of one-day voting with paper ballots and hand counting? Leading off today is Patty Haskins, former member of the Wadsworth City Council and retired math teacher at Wadsworth Senior High. Then Mike Reese, member of the team at at Howard Hanna Real Estate, and former member of the board of directors of the Wadsworth Area Chamber of Commerce. Then Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&D Financial Services, and finally Susan Hanlon, retired dean of the College of Business at the University of Akron, and soon to become former member of the Wadsworth City Council. Patty, our national voting process has changed over the years in order to make voting more convenient, but some think that it has also become more open to fraud and abuse. Do you think the old ways were better?
No, not at all.
Surprise.
I think changes over the years have been made so as to make voting more accessible for people and easier for people to do. Long gone are the days of the poll tax and being discriminated against, and blacks could not vote and only males could vote. And, so changes were made over the years to make again, voting more accessible to everyone. I think there's been so much talk about fraud in the last few elections, particularly in 2020, and it was found that there really wasn't that much fraud. Now, yes, it did occur, but it was in such small, insignificant amounts that it didn't make a difference. If we look at some of the changes that have been made, I think that they've been done to make the process actually better and more accurate. I know there are some that think that paper ballots are the way to go and we should go back to that, and that everything should be hand counted. That is definitely not more efficient than the way that it's done now. I remember when I first started working at the polls, at the end of the evening, we had to count the signatures in the poll book and match that up with the check marks. Actually, the check marks in the poll book and the signatures in the signature book, and make sure that the numbers were the same. So you would sit there and by hand, two different people would count up 300, 400 some signatures. And I swear to heaven, it would take us hours to get those numbers to actually meet up, because it was so easy to make a mistake when doing that by hand. Now that everything is done, well, in most counties, it's done by machines. It's done so accurately, and there isn't really a chance for fraud. And there isn't a chance for making the mistake like there was in the past. I think this works out much better. So having just, paper ballots to me seems to be working in the past. Some of the changes, I think, in the voting process, supposedly to make it safer, though, are making it more difficult for people to vote. When you have in some states where they have closed down voting locations, when they have limited the amount of early voting that can be done. What happens is you end up with people being forced to stand in line for 6.5, 8 hours in order to vote, and that should never happen. I mean, I don't think that happens here in Ohio, and that's because I think we do have a reasonable way to handle that. We have limited early voting. We have mail-in voting, which accommodates those that are disabled or unable to get to the polls for whatever reason, makes it more convenient for them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making voting convenient for people. methods, things of that type are only done to discourage people from voting. And at no time should we discourage our citizenry from voting. I think it needs to be accessible. There's something like 18 states that have either all elections or some elections that are done totally by mail. And they really haven't found them to be fraudulent. Now, I don't know that I would like to go to that type of situation, but it's something that's already being done and it's working quite well. I know there's a great deal of discussion about IDs. I really don't have a problem with the photo ID, which is what we have in Ohio now. Now, the laws on that in Ohio have changed in the last few years. For example, it used to be you could not use a passport as an ID for voting, but you could use an electric bill or a utility bill or a pay stub. Now it's the reverse. They've changed. They made the passport the legitimate way to, along with your driver's license, to vote and to register to vote. And you're not allowed to use those bills for that purpose. You know, those are things that I think are reasonable. I don't have my only problem ever with requiring photo ID or saying it has to be a certain thing was if there's a cost. But if I'm not mistaken, you can get a state ID to vote with for free if necessary. And that's a great way to have that handled so that everyone has the right to vote, but we're sure that the person that's showing up at that poll booth actually is the person that is registered to vote. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of research here to kind of get to see what some studies have concluded, because there's been a lot of talk about voter fraud, especially in recent years. Um, and what I found is that while there is some voter fraud, and I don't think we'll ever get rid of it completely, um, it's never been enough to change an election in any way, and most of it was errors by either a voter wrote something wrong or that disqualified their vote, or it was an administrative mistake at the uh, administrative level at the polling places. Um, but what I have found is, we had I famously in 2020 there was a lot of talk about, when President Trump had lost the election, that it was massive voter fraud, it was massive voter fraud. Um, but everything that they found, all the cases that they brought were dismissed. I mean, they found that there wasn't any voter fraud that altered the election in any way. What I looked up was the Brennan Center for Justice. I don't know if you guys are familiar. They
Yes.
found that voter fraud was very rare, and the most, like I said, most instances of voter fraud were mistakes made by the voters or the administrators. There was another professor, Justin Grimmer. He's a Centennial Professor of Public Policy and Political Science at the Stanford School of Humanities and Sciences. He did a study on this as well. Found that uh, up to one quarter of voters in the United States believe that U.S. elections are inaccurate. And of this one quarter, they tend to be A, Republican, B, older, and C, white. His study debunked the major theories of voter fraud, including the Dominion voter machines, which that was a big deal. I don't know if you remember, there was a huge lawsuit where Dominion won. They found that their voter machines were actually accurate and that there was no fraud in that way. Um, Also, absentee ballots. They found that absentee ballots were largely legitimate. So there was, maybe a couple instances where they were filled out wrong or whatever, but they were also um, good votes. They've also found that most cases of voter fraud that were brought as court cases were based on very shockingly flimsy evidence. Um, like I said, 2020 claims were all dismissed in court, every one of them. There are some voters who they did concede there were some instances of voter fraud, but it was very minuscule. Really just isolated cases here and there. As Patty was saying, I think our biggest problem with voting is the disenfranchisement of voters. At one point in Georgia, for instance, there was one voting center for 7 different counties. And then that, to me, that's how they're also shortening voting hours in that, in the same state in Georgia. So now you have all these thousands of people as they have to vote at one place and not even enough time to allow them to all vote in that a lot of time. So, I mean, that's a clear disenfranchisement of voters. And this has been really bad, and especially in the southern states. So in Ohio, we have a pretty good system, I think. You go in, you show your ID, you cast your vote. They make sure that you're who you are, and I don't think that there's an issue with that. I think we all agree you can show your ID. I don't think anybody has a problem with that. Just to let them know, hey, I am who I am. But now with the SAVE Act, they're making it a lot harder. Just to change, if this passes and becomes law, just to change your party affiliation or to re-register. I mean, you have to go and bring all kinds of documentation, including a passport. That that seems to me is insane because we have, Republicans and Democrats alike will try to register people to vote for the upcoming election. Now you're not going to be able to do that at the street level. What are you going to have people bring all this documentation to you just to sign up, to register? I think that that's absolute insanity, and it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. Um, I think that we should make it easier to vote. I don't have a problem with people doing mail-in votes. Originally, that was started during the Civil War, to allow soldiers to vote while they weren't at home. But there are a lot of places in rural America where it's hard to get in to vote. Places like in Georgia, I mentioned, where it's almost impossible to vote. And the mail-in voting does help. So I don't think there's a problem with that. There hasn't been any fraud on a large scale with that. So that's just a few of my thoughts on it.
Okay, well, I'm anxious to hear what Bryan has to say.
Well, now Patty's worked at the polls longer than I have, but I think I have about 6 years under my belt. One of the issues that I think I've noticed when you talk about more polling places is all the people that are there are volunteers. And if you can't get the people to man the polls, it's very expensive to have all these people on the payroll for the whole year when you only need them maybe 2-3 times a year. We have a special election coming up here in May, and we go through a lot of training. I can't speak for any other state or any other county, but I know in Medina County, they're real serious about the training that you have to go through. They're serious about making sure that nobody walks away feeling like they've been disenfranchised by someone making a comment or anything like that. But, the bottleneck, it seems to me, in some of these states is they just can't find the people to work at the polls. Now, some of their systems probably need upgraded, bring them into the digital age. But I'm convinced in Ohio, with everything that we go through, you really have to work hard to defraud or go in and vote for somebody else. There's so many ways that the Board of Elections checks on people. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're a non-citizen in Ohio, the back of your driver's license has non-citizen, and you cannot vote. I mean, we got to put that to rest. If you're not a citizen of the United States, you cannot vote in an election. Don't let anybody tell you any other ways. If you're not a citizen, you might be working on a visa or a green card, have been here for 10 or 15 years, but if you're not a citizen, don't show up at the polls because you're not going to be able to vote. And the state of Ohio put that little marker on the back of the ID to basically identify those people. And I don't think we get much of that in our neck of the woods. Now, maybe in some counties out in California or places where they have a lot of migrants or, a lot of folks that maybe aren't citizens, border towns, things like that, maybe that's a particular issue for them. But in the state of Ohio, especially in our county and most counties in Ohio, it's really hard to actually defraud or cast a vote that you don't belong there. There's so many checks and balances. I mean, just to vote a provisional ballot. I don't know if Patty's happy. Oh my heavens. It's a real process. And the Board of Elections, if you show up, you're going to be able to vote. But if you don't have an ID and you don't have the necessary documents to vote, you'll still get the vote, but you're going to vote provisional. And then you'll have the 3 or 4 days after the voting, 4 days to go to the Board of Elections and show them your paperwork so that your vote is counted. Yeah, I think our system here in Ohio could be duplicated throughout the country. I'm really not that much of a fan of online voting. I don't know if you can actually, and everybody, they compare it to these PayPal systems and all that kind of stuff. And I just think voting is one of those things, whether you have to make it a national day of voting or, you have a set a time where, so many days before, so many days after, but you have one day where you go and you cast your ballot. I don't think we've had any problems in Medina County for the longest time when it comes to tabulating and counting those votes. It's all done in a bipartisan manner. If Patty and I were working at a poll station and we go to the Board of Elections and we take our equipment over, there has to be a Republican and a Democrat.
Right.
To open up the poll book, there has to be a Republican and a Democrat. To open up the ballot marking device that the people stick their ballot in, there has to be a Republican and a Democrat. It's to close everything down, the larger machine that you actually put your ballot in, it casts your ballot, and you get your little sticker. To close that machine down, it's almost like you get nuclear codes. It's in an envelope, and everybody's got to be watching it. And so, yeah, I feel very comfortable with the way we do things. Now, I will tell you that this election, there's going to be a special training because there's been an issue in one of the counties with one of their poll books. And to tell you how serious, we're going to have to do, I think, and I don't know exactly what we're going to have to do, but there might be a restriction on using the poll book to check somebody in to give them their ballot, because there was one machine in one county that they had a little bit of a problem with. And because they take voting seriously, I believe any county that uses these types of machines has to have them audited. And this special election, which probably will be very light in attendance, that we actually have to use the signature books.
One question for you: what if you don't have a driver's license? What kind of ID do you use?
Passport.
You have to have a photo ID, so a passport, an ID, a government issued military identification card, a state issued ID card, but it has to be a photo ID. It has to be current. It cannot be expired. But John, if you showed up and you didn't have anything, you could vote provisional. Mm-hmm. They're not going to send you away. You're going to send you over to the table, and you're going to have to fill out some forms, and you'll cast your vote. And that vote, you'll have 4 days to go to the Board of Elections with your documentation so that your vote counts.
Okay.
You can even have the wrong address on that ID card.
Right.
A lot of times people have registered to vote, and a month before the voting they would move, and so their driver's license has a different address than what's in the polling book.
Mm-hmm.
And they allow you to still vote because they don't expect you to expend the money to get a brand new driver's license just because you moved.
Right.
Susan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I do have a question before I to the experts on voting. And this might sound stupid, but it's just an assumption I'm sitting here making. You have to be registered to vote before your vote will be counted, right?
Yes.
Like if you walk in there and it's not just I don't have my ID or whatever, but if you're just not registered, will they still let you vote? And that'll be provisional. And then they say, okay, you weren't registered to vote, so it doesn't count. Is that right? Okay.
Right.
So that's where, so I agree that, I don't think fraud is an issue. Where I think the opening is for those claims to come up is that there's so much variation between the states. There are so many differences. And so, they go through and they just pick on states. Like, I don't think Trump ever claimed there was any fraud in Ohio, right? But, there's just like, there are states that don't require you to show a voter ID, a face, a photo ID. And the question, I think the tension that we struggle with is always access versus fraud, risk of fraud. And so, typically everything you do to give more people access, to quote, make it easier, the tension there is with, but are you increasing fraud? And you do hear people saying you shouldn't have to be registered to vote. You should be able to just go in and vote. Well, you talk about fraud, and because you could do that all day, you could go from place to place. If everybody has a system like Ohio has, those would all, I guess every vote would be provisional. And then they'd have to go back, and I don't know what they would do if you haven't registered. I don't know how that would work, but you do hear that. And then the other thing you hear a lot is we should go to online voting. Online voting, I mean, I think it's probably as secure as what we have now, because ultimately the electronic voting machines, it all goes online, right? It all goes into some kind of, it doesn't go into a database. It doesn't go online at all.
It's not open that way. That was one of the concerns with all the machines, that they were
so they're never connected to each other. They don't, everything doesn't go in.
The idea is you can't go in and hack them.
So let me make sure I'm clear on this. The poll books, when you walk in and you see the two people, they've got a poll book, an electronic iPad, those are connected with the other poll books. They're not connected to the internet or anything, because they need to communicate.
Right. To vote, to tally the votes.
To say, hey, listen, this person already checked in over here. Yeah. So those are the only things. The ballot marking, when you walk up, once you get your ballot and you walk up and you put it in, and that's not connected to anything. That's all. And
it always prints a ballot, so they always have those.
It prints out the ballot, and then you walk over to the DS200, which is the tabulator, and you put it in, and then your paper ballot drops down. It gets tabulated, and there is a thumb drive that comes off of that goes that night to the Board of Elections.
Okay, so it's never online. It doesn't get transmitted anymore. Yeah. No. Well, then I know it would be great to have more participation. But I just think there's lots of people who they don't care if they vote. And I think that you should have to go through a little bit of effort to vote, to show that you're putting something into it, and B, to have the system be safe and no fraud. And then the other thing you hear, because there is so much variation, should the federal government run our elections? Well, me and the federal government, I don't want them to do anything.
Yeah.
But that people say, well, that would solve the problem. If the federal government ran elections and the federal government had to pay for elections, then you wouldn't have the situation like you have in Georgia, like Mike talked about. You wouldn't have this ability to say we're only going to have X number of polling places, and all that. But I don't think that would be a good idea either. So, I don't usually like this, because I really like change, but I think it's good the way it is. I really do.
And Ohio has made changes in the last few years. The idea we didn't used to need a photo ID. That's really been within the last decade that we.
Well, and every state doesn't require that.
No,
Right.
not every state
You
does.
just sign the book, and I guess as long as your signature matches what they have on
And that's
file.
what was used
Yeah.
as the guide, was the signature.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all agree that Ohio has a pretty good system.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of the country? You could fill up a whole book with all the different voting requirements in different
Yeah.
states, and I'm just wondering how safe the whole thing is. I don't know. I'm old enough that my first election was 1960, and I voted for John Kennedy. But in the aftermath, the things that happened in Cook County, Illinois, that sort of swung that election in Kennedy's favor, were pretty much in control of the Democrat Party in Illinois, and the rules were such that it was possible to cheat if you really had a powerful guy in the head of a party in a state.
Yeah, and I guess it's just how you count the votes. It's not the fraud so much in terms of who's voting. It's how they count them, right? I mean, and that I don't know anything about that in terms of what things are in place to make sure the votes are counted accurately.
Yeah.
Well, again, like Bryan said, you do it with a Republican and Democrat at the Board of Elections.
Yeah.
They are equally divided. And I think making everything electronic is much more accurate than trying to do everything.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I mean, because you could, I mean, everybody remembers the stupid hanging chads, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you leave it up to that kind of interpretation, you could have a lot of error, a lot of fraud.
If you remember back in the day, you put the ballot in and then you had your little puncher.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you punched, And
Yeah.
if you made a mistake, I know you get 3 opportunities to vote. If you can't vote right for 3 times, we're sending you over to the provisional table.
Yeah.
We're going to put you through that painful experience.
Right.
Remember Florida and the pregnant chads?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hanging chads.
Hanging chads. Yeah, we have our system is it's the audit or chain of custody is if there's a question, we can pull that person's ballot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
now, by the way, does Summit County have machines now, or are they still paper ballots? Because up until a couple years ago, they were still doing paper ballots.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people realize that, but
yeah.
I'm afraid that we've run out of time, but I've got some questions for you on the other side. But see you all in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.